12-year-old girl mocked at the range, then she nailed every target blindfolded. Did you really think a 12-year-old girl could outshoot you? With her eyes closed, Jackson Caldwell's mocking chuckle echoed across the empty firing range as Aaliyah Johnson stood barefoot on cracked asphalt, a single beam of late afternoon sun catching the silver star etched into her leather headband. She didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes and drew a deep breath, letting the warmth of her mother's locket rest against her heart. Growing up in Riverside's multicultural sprawl, she'd learned early that talent and bloodline didn't always earn respect, especially not for the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Maria Johnson, the Air Force's top sharpshooter, who'd been forced into retirement after exposing corruption in the ranks. Now, Aaliyah carried her mother's legacy in her veins, and a determination that risked everything. From the moment she'd first handled a .22 rifle at age 7, guided by her mother's steady hands, she'd felt an electric thrill each time the barrel aligned with its target. Yet, every local competition saw her dismissed as a kid or just a girl, and Riverdale's own Jackson Caldwell, a decorated former National Guard officer turned private range owner, prided himself on crushing hope with sneers. Today had been no different until she asked to try the advanced intuitive marksmanship drill, a challenge Caldwell reserved for skilled adults. His refusal had been as swift as it was humiliating. Come on, princess. Leave the heavy lifting to the grown-ups. He'd thrown down a gauntlet without knowing she was about to rewrite the rules. She could feel her pulse in her ears, thudding insistent, but her purpose was sharper than fear. Every insult he'd lobbed over the years, every sideways look from new shooters in this racially and politically charged community had distilled into one fierce resolve. Aaliyah tapped the star on her headband, a gift from her mother, symbolizing freedom, and wings an ironic emblem on the ground, but a reminder that true flight soared beyond circumstance. She steadied her grip on the rifle, imagining the concentric rings of the target as the many obstacles she'd already overcome, sudden racial slurs, whispered doubts about her age, even schoolmates warning her to stay in her place. Tonight, she would prove that place was wherever she chose to stand. As Caldwell raised an eyebrow expecting another excuse, Aaliyah took her stance. Her lungs expanded, filling with the desert air, the distant hum of city traffic fading behind her. With eyes closed, she exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and felt a single gratifying click. A fleeting moment later, the entire range hushed as the shot rang out, followed by the undeniable thud of impact dead center. Caldwell's jaw dropped. Behind him, the setting sun cast their long shadows side by side, opponent and challenger, locked in a moment pregnant with revelation. Aaliyah cracked open one eye, just enough to see his disbelief. She closed it again, ready for the next move. "Why are you even here?" Councilmember Olivia White's voice cut through the corridor of the Community Recreation Center like a steel blade. Aaliyah Johnson, clutching her Silver Star headband and mother's locket, met the council member's stare without flinching. This was Riverside politics, a swirl of progressive promises and simmering prejudice. On walls plastered with campaign posters, in every hue, Latino, Black, Asian, White, Aaliyah could feel the weight of generations arguing over gun rights, safety, and tradition. She was 12. They were decades old. And yet here, she stood ready to challenge every assumption. Behind closed doors, Mayor Delgado sat flanked by local veterans and PTA leaders. Aaliyah stepped forward, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I've trained since I was 7 under my mother's guidance. I'm asking for one chance to prove that age, gender, or race don't limit ability." The room pulsed with polite coughs and whispered skepticism until Sergeant Marcus Lee, the deputy who'd quietly checked her safety credentials, cleared his throat. "Her records are impeccable. She finished advanced drills last year without a single safety violation." He slid a folder across the table. Aaliyah's detailed log sheet signature stamped by her mother before retirement lay open for all to see. Olivia's lips tightened. "This is a child. Our regulations are clear. We can't set a precedent." Aaliyah's world narrowed to a single point. her mother's star headband shimmering in the overhead light. It symbolized freedom, precision, and the promise of her lineage, and tonight it carried the burden of every kid told to sit down and shut up. She felt her pulse quiet into a calm drumbeat. I understand the risks, she said, but isn't it riskier to assume someone can't succeed based on who they are? My mother taught me that courage is a choice. The room stilled. Outside, the hum of traffic and distant sirens reminded her of civilian lives that hung in the balance whenever hesitance left a gap in safety. She thought of her friend Maya, a black girl in her class who was denied science fairs because she looked too young to handle equipment. She thought of her own dreams of flight, the roar of jet engines she'd only heard through her mother's stories. And she thought of Jackson Caldwell's mocking grin, still fresh in her mind. Mayor Delgado exhaled. We'll allow one formal trial under supervision, strictly controlled adult instructors only. Aaliyah nodded chest tight with relief, but as she turned to leave, Olivia's parting words trailed behind. Don't make me regret this vote. Aaliyah gripped her locket. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Next was the firing range itself, where her first live trial would either vindicate her claim or reinforce every barrier she'd fought to break. And somewhere out there, Caldwell was sharpening his ambition for one final showdown. Everyone step back. She's about to prove you wrong. The firing range instructor's warning echoed across the gravel plain as Aaliyah Johnson shouldered the modified .22 rifle, each worn spot on its stock, a testament to her countless hours of practice at her mother's old training ground. For some, this looked reckless, handing a preteen a weapon calibrated for precision. But for Aaliyah, her mother's voice rang in her ears. Aim with your heart, not just your eyes. The silver star on her headband caught the morning sun flickering like a promise that she carried on her brow. Around her, adults jostled for a better view. Councilmember White with her arms crossed, watching for a misstep. Shark Lee adjusting his headset to record every shot. Even Mayor Delgado lingered at the fence line, torn between civic responsibility and political pressure. In the distance, Jackson Jax Caldwell lounged against his truck, a half-smile playing on his lips as he adjusted his designer sunglasses. He had set the stage for this moment, vetoing her first requests, dismissing her as a publicity stunt. Now, he intended to watch her fail. Aaliyah closed her eyes, channeling the hundreds of drills she'd run by feel. Her fingers brushed the locket at her throat, a teardrop-shaped silver charm, engraved with her mother's call sign and a single wing. It was more than a keepsake. It was her guide when vision failed and courage wavered. She inhaled the leathery scent of the range mats, the dust of live rounds, and the distant tang of ocean salt drifting inland. In that breath, she summoned every lesson, every swing of the rifle butt, every whispered reassurance her mother had given before deployment. The first shot cracked like thunder, the rifle bucking against her shoulder. Aaliyah felt the recoil through her spine, but stayed steady, exhaling in rhythm until the dust at the base of the target settled. She cracked one eye open to see the bright red bullseye pierce dead center. A ripple of gasps ran through the crowd. Jax's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She allowed herself a sliver of satisfaction, then closed her eyes again, ready for challenge 2. Shot 2. A soft click and silence. Caldwell raised his voice. Must be a fluke. Try again, kid. No hesitation. Click. This time the thud came so close to the first hole that the target paper collapsed inward. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Volunteers exchanged stunned glances. Aaliyah sensed the collective doubt evaporating, replaced by something else expectation. She felt pressure coalesce in her chest, the future of her dreams, and every promise she'd ever made to her mother. As she readied the third round, a sudden flare of wind kicked up sand, whipped against her boots, and the metal plates of the shooting stands rattled. In an instant, she could have blamed the elements, used it as an excuse to falter. Instead, she leaned into it, grounding her toes, letting the breeze guide her stance. Click. Another perfect shot. The wind carried the echo away, leaving a hush so deep it shrieked in her ears. Jax Caldwell stepped forward, brows knitted in frustration. He barked over the commotion. This isn't luck, that's ridiculous. But Aaliyah held her ground, drawing on the resilience forged in a childhood of whispered doubts and sideways glances. She manipulated the barrel, tracked her breath across the stock, and squeezed. Click. 4 for 4. Each strike a testament to her mother's legacy and her own steel will. In the aftermath, someone released the tension with a shout. Outstanding cameras flashed. Even Councilmember White's posture softened respect, seeping into her expression. Yet, beneath their awe, lay a ticking question. How far would Caldwell go to reclaim control of this narrative? Aaliyah lowered her rifle, every muscle humming with triumph, and the knowledge that true challenges lay ahead, bigger targets, higher stakes, and deeper truths waiting to be drawn into the light. She unhooked her locket and let it swing free, knowing the next reveal would test more than her aim. Have you lost your mind, Aaliyah Jackson? Caldwell's voice cracked through the static of her Heud, uplink a mixture of rage and incredulity. Behind him, his prized F-16 instructors fumed at their consoles as news channels exploded, with live footage of her shots and documents scrolling across the screen. Aaliyah's heart pounded. She had breached every protocol, stolen a fighter jet, exposed a cover-up, and now she was broadcasting it all to the world. Yet, in that moment, she felt an unshakable calm. She remembered her mother's words. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Peering through the HUD, the encrypted files glowed forged inspection reports, emails ordering maintenance cuts, and the ghost signature of Caldwell himself. Each file name etched a timeline of deceit. She toggled the uplink, shoving the proof into every news outlet's server, then locked it to an unjammable frequency. There was no turning back. Below, alarms blared across the base. Anti-air flares streaked upward, almost poetic sparks, against the twilight sky. Aaliyah banked the F-22 into their path, weaving through the tracer-like streaks. Every evasive maneuver tested her training and her nerves. Her knuckles whitened on the stick, but she refused to yield. DOJ investigators, Pentagon hotlines, defense journalists, they were all watching, and she would not falter. The symbol on her headband, the silver star, gleamed like a rallying beacon. It stood for freedom, the right to know, the right to speak truth to power. And now, it led her through this storm of flares and fury. Suddenly, Caldwell's own voice splintered across every frequency. Shut it down. You'll kill innocents. But Aaliyah raised her voice into the mic, calm and unwavering. These documents save lives by stopping negligence. You chose politics over people. She cut the afterburners, dropping into a steep dive that shuddered through the airframe. Below her, flares detonated harmlessly overhead. She could almost feel her mother's pride, a weightless lift to her spirit. Then came the hardest decision: deliver the F-22 into sanctioned airspace, or eject and risk capture. Her mind flashed to Lieutenant Maria Johnson's final mission, standing her ground, never abandoning the plane. Resolute, Aaliyah leveled out, locking on the remote desert strip where Sergeant Lee and Mayor Delgado's security team waited. As she broke through the canyon walls into open sky, she cut the live stream encryption key with a single command: I am Captain Aaliyah Johnson. This is for every soldier whose life was gambled away by corrupt leaders. The uplink went dark, leaving millions breathless. In those final seconds before touchdown, Caldwell's silhouette appeared at the runway's end, his posture stiff with the realization that his empire of lies was crumbling. Aaliyah braced for landing, heart hammering with triumph and fear, knowing that the real reckoning was just beginning. Every network in America just dropped live footage of Caldwell's lies. This is real. As Aaliyah Johnson taxied the F-22 onto the desert runway, under floodlights swarming with media drones and military tech teams, she could feel the tremor of history settling into place. Earlier tonight, she'd poured every shred of evidence into the public eye emails, ordering no further inquiry. Falsified inspection logs, the ghost signature of the man who thought he could bury a life to protect his ego. Now the aftermath unfolded faster than any press release news crawls, lit up with military cover-up exposed, and hashtags like Justice for Morales trended within seconds. Inside the base command tent, General Armstrong's face glowed in the light of multiple monitors. He stared at documents rolling across multiple screens before turning to his aide. Prepare a full inquiry. I want Caldwell in cuffs by dawn. He tapped a finger against his steel rank insignia, an unspoken recognition that protocol had bowed to truth. Around him, career officers whispered pointedly. 2 days ago, they'd drafted talking points to defend Caldwell. Now they scrambled to distance themselves. Military discipline met moral imperative head-on, and morality was winning. On the runway's perimeter, Sergeant Marcus Lee guided Aaliyah out of the cockpit. She stepped down onto the heat-hazed tarmac boots, echoing against the concrete, the F-22's silhouette looming like a dragon tamed. Cameras circled her. Reporters shouted questions. She answered each calmly. I flew because our leaders gambled with lives. These files prove they broke faith with those who serve. Aaliyah's voice carried a steady conviction. Her mother once wielded an echo of Maria Johnson's final mission, inspiring a new generation. In the crowd, Jackson Caldwell staggered forward, framed by the harsh glare of spotlight. His designer jacket looked out of place against the military backdrop. He opened his mouth to protest, but found no words, only the cold realization that every barrier he'd erected had crumbled under the weight of evidence. The man who once barked, "A girl like you doesn't belong here," now stood silent. In his eyes flickered not anger, but the stunned admission of defeat. Across town, Aaliyah's father watched a TV screen in their modest living room, tears tracking down his cheeks. Lily, her 6-year-old sister, clutched a homemade sign reading, "My sister saves lives," and looked up at him. "Daddy, can I try too someday?" He nodded, voice thick, "Yes, baby, you can." That childlike faith reflected the true impact of Aaliyah's act. More than headlines and investigations, she had reshaped a community's belief in itself. By midnight, the Pentagon announced emergency policy changes, a new whistleblower protection clause, transparent maintenance logs, and mandatory safety audits for all pilot training programs. Within hours, foundations pledging scholarships to underrepresented young marksmen popped up online, fueled by viral support. It wasn't just Aaliyah's victory, it was the start of systemic reform. Yet, as celebrations swept the base, Aaliyah slipped away to a quiet corner of the flight line. There she placed her Silver Star headband on the nose cone of the F-22, an unspoken salute to her mother and to the ideals she championed. Above the engines cooled to a low hum, the metal warm from flight. Aaliyah closed her eyes heartful, knowing this moment was more than triumph. It was a promise unleashed. But as the first tendrils of dawn crept over the horizon, she felt a prickle of anticipation. The real work was just beginning. Some people said I was too young to change the world, too fragile to face the storm. As Aaliyah Johnson walked along the runway's edge at dawn, she could almost hear those whispers carried on the desert breeze. The F-22's black fuselage gleamed behind her, its engines still humming faintly from her unauthorized flight. Reporters had long departed. The floodlights dimmed. What remained was the raw aftermath of her revolution-shaken commander's viral proof and a community kneeling at the altar of accountability. But Aaliyah's victory felt incomplete. The real reckoning lay in nails scraped raw by the edge of power in policies rewritten, but not yet lived. She clutched the silver-winged locket at her throat, a promise of flight and freedom, then slipped it into the pocket of her flight suit. That symbol had guided her through the chaos tonight, reminding her that true courage meant risking everything for truth. Behind her, General Armstrong's urgent briefing crackled on her comms. "Captain Johnson, incoming transport. We need to move that jet now. Interviews begin in 30. The weight of expectation pressed on her shoulders. They wanted her to be the smiling hero, the golden girl, who fixed a broken system with one daring act. But Aaliyah knew systems didn't heal overnight. Courage could expose rot, only collective vigilance could uproot it. Before she climbed back into the cockpit of her C-130 transport, the next morning she paused at the airstrip's boundary. A small group had gathered Deputy Lee carrying fresh coffee, Mayor Delgado with a stack of new training protocols signed by local leaders, and even Councilmember White, her arms uncrossed, offering a tentative nod. Aaliyah felt the tension between her needs and theirs. Her mission to serve soldiers still soared in her veins, but the civilian world demanded spectacle over substance. She swallowed hard, forcing a firm nod. "Let's keep flying supplies," she said, voice low but steady. "Because war zones don't pause for politics." As she taxied the lumbering transport onto the runway, the first light of sunrise cast long shadows of the jet beneath her. The vast desert beyond the fence symbolized both opportunity and abandonment, places no one remembered until crisis struck. In each supply drop, she would echo her stand, that every life, every part, every whispered plea mattered. But Twilight's flash had also illuminated one cruel truth. Jackson Caldwell's network of old-school alliances still pulsed in the dark. His supporters, shamed but not defeated, were digging in for a counterattack. They whispered of legal action, of discrediting her credentials, of painting her act as reckless endangerment. The transport's engines growled to life, and Aaliyah guided the nose gently skyward, the runway shrinking behind her. Through her headset, she heard radio chatter reports of new recruits reading her live stream line-by-line parents, buying headbands embroidered with silver wings for their children. The symbol she bore was catching fire, untamed, unstoppable. Yet higher and higher, she climbed the valley below, bathed in gold. She felt a steely resolve harden in her chest. This wasn't about one child fighting one man's arrogance anymore. It was about a community reclaiming its future. Ahead lay the jagged canyons that funneled her flight path toward distant bases in need of aid. Each drop would be a heartbeat of service, echoing the sacrifice of her mother and the price of silence. Aaliyah adjusted her grip on the controls mind, already planning the next briefings on base safety reforms and whistleblower channels. But as the canyon walls closed in, she sensed the tension knot tightening in her stomach. Beyond logistics lay the deeper mission, ensuring that the truth she'd bled to reveal remained more than a momentary flash. Down below in the hush, before her first supply drop, a single voice crackled through the static. "Captain Johnson, we have unidentified aircraft approaching the corridor." Her heart lurched. The war she'd flown through before defending lines on the ground now threatened to close in on her again. She took a steadying breath, braced for the unknown, and whispered to herself, "Some storms you chase, you can't outrun them." Then she throttled up, diving toward the shadowy mouth of the canyon, ready to face whatever emerged from its depths. Think you changed the world with one flight? You have no idea what's coming next. As the rotor wash of the C-130 faded over the canyon lips, Aaliyah Johnson surveyed the storm she'd unleashed. Below her, rotating banners on news tickers touted systemic reform and whistleblower protections, while hashtags like #WhereChargAleah Effect trended in every time zone. She felt equal parts triumph and anxiety. She had exposed corruption, but real change demanded more than viral moments. This was her moment to prove that courage could ripple into lasting justice. On the ground, Jackson Caldwell's empire trembled. Legal teams descended on his private range with subpoenas, while disgraced investors pulled funding for his training facilities. Behind closed doors, Caldwell's backers argued, "She's a child. We can discredit her." Yet each attempt to smear her only amplified her truth. Aaliyah watched updates flash across her HUD statements, from military brass, praising her integrity outreach, from youth programs, inspired by her stand, and commentary from national security analysts, citing her action as precedent. The symbols she carried, the silver-winged locket and headband, suddenly sprouted into pop culture icons for justice. But Aaliyah's victory wasn't untroubled. Rallying cries met old fears in vulnerable communities. Some argued that her defiance risked national security. Others warned it emboldened reckless individuals. Aaliyah understood these tensions. She'd lived with prejudice carved into every report card and conversation. Her inner strength had always been forged in doubt's furnace. Now, as she began her descent toward the next supply drop, she felt that familiar knot. True reform required vigilance beyond one dramatic act. She needed to build bridges, not just break barriers. Her radio crackled Captain Johnson incoming civilians, requesting safety workshops. Aaliyah smiled, recalling the first time she'd been turned away from a junior ROTC clinic because of her age. Now, those same recruiters wanted her to lead training sessions on ethics and marksmanship for teenagers across Riverside. She remembered her mother's final words: teach them not only to aim, but to know why. The promise she'd made to uphold her mother's legacy was blossoming into action she hadn't dared imagine. Below, the sun sank behind the hills, casting long shadows that stretched like questions. Aaliyah guided the transport onto the landing pad, heart pounding with possibility and purpose. As her boots touched the ground, she looked up to the sky, where her stolen flight had scribed a new course for justice. Yet she knew this was not the end of her journey, only the threshold of a broader mission. Ahead lay policy debates, community dialogues, and the ongoing struggle to ensure that truth and courage remained more than fleeting headlines. And, as the last glow of dusk faded, Aaliyah reached into her pocket and touched her locket, whispering to herself, "This is only the beginning. You think I'm done? This is when the real work begins." Aaliyah Johnson's voice held the same steady resolve that had carried her through the cockpit of an F-22, but now she spoke to an arena far broader than any runway. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as she stepped onto the stage for the first of many community forums she'd been invited to lead. Behind her, the silver-winged star from her headband glinted under the stage lights, a beacon of hope and accountability. She raised a single finger to call the room to silence her silhouette, framed by a giant projection of Caldwell's forged memos, now public proof that no lie could hide forever. "Tonight," she began, "we're not here to rehash stale promises or tout temporary victories. We're here to build a blueprint for ongoing integrity, because justice isn't a checkbox. It's a constant commitment." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, parents clutching their teen shoulders, veterans nodding in solidarity, local leaders leaning forward. Every eye was on her, hungry for guidance beyond the viral moment. Aaliyah inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of her mother's legacy lighten with each heartbeat. That legacy had taught her that real courage meant standing up not just once, but every day. She unveiled a series of new initiatives: a youth marksmanship program paired with civic ethics workshops, a scholarship fund for underrepresented students in aerospace, and a whistleblower hotline backed by community sponsorship. Each announcement sparked applause, but Aaliyah knew applause was fleeting. What mattered was action, blood, sweat, and conversations at kitchen tables. She shared stories of Maria Johnson's late-night drills with her daughter of sergeants in distant bases, who had quietly implemented transparency measures of a single teacher whose encouragement kept Aaliyah's aim true when doubt crept in. The audience rose to their feet when she spoke of the new wing on Riverside's Air and Space Museum, named the Star of Justice, featuring her mother's medals and the headband that symbolized unbreakable spirit. Yet, as cheers swelled, Aaliyah felt a flicker of unease. The museum plaque would honor her mother's name. But what of the countless unsung heroes, the quiet guardians of truth, whose names would never grace brass plates? She leaned into the microphone and lowered her voice. "Symbols guide us, but we are the ones who have to walk the path they mark. Don't let this moment become an exhibit in a case file. Let it be a living testament in our neighborhoods, our schools, our hearts." The room inhaled in collective resolve. As the forum closed, Aaliyah stepped into the evening air, greeted by a lone figure. Jackson Caldwell head bowed, offering her the original fistful of forged files he'd surrendered under subpoena. He extended them with trembling hands. "I suppose you can't unsee what you've shown the world," he said, voice rough with remorse. She accepted the papers, feeling the coarse texture of his contrition. This gesture, humble, unscripted, signified the hardest victory of all, transforming an enemy into an ally. Under the desert stars, the runway lay silent behind her, its asphalt memory of engines and insurgent truths. Aaliyah unclasped her locket and held it aloft, its wing catching starlight. For every voice silenced, every wound hidden, May this be our call to courage, she whispered. In that hush, the horizon glowed with uncharted possibility. And as she turned toward the next challenge, legislative committees, training classes, and quiet mentorships, she knew her journey was far from over. Because even the brightest star must keep burning to light the way for those who follow.